Welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Li Qiuyuan, sitting in for Liu Xin. In this series, we dissect stories that are making headlines around the world and talk to our guests to compensate for the missing pieces of the puzzle. So join us in real time by sending us your comments or questions via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or Weibo. If you're watching this live on the CGTN app, email us at thepointwithlx@cgtn.com. Let us know what you think, and we live stream Headline Buster on Thursday at 11 a.m. Beijing time and air the segment on TV at 11:30 a.m. on Fridays. So do join us during the live streaming and get in touch. We would love to receive and possibly read out your insightful comments. So, what happens when you go to Disney Park but people think you are trapped in Jurassic Park? Well, they get anxious, then panic, then start hammering out frantic headlines like these. All these headlines conjure up incredibly nightmarish images, perfect for Halloween. But sadly, they also happen to be incredibly wrong. What happened, really, at the Shanghai Disneyland on October 31st? Well, let's take a look at this. According to the Daily Beast, as Halloween nightmares go, it's going to take a lot to beat this. Some 34,000 fun seekers were thrown into lockdown at Shanghai's Disneyland Sunday night after a single case of COVID-19 prompted police to blockade the exits and test every single person in the park before allowing them to leave. It's the latest example of the harsh measures China is taking as it pursues the elusive goal of zero COVID within its borders. Beijing is battling a fresh wave of the deadly contagion. While reading that, you'd think that the Chinese government went berserk, took 34,000 innocent people hostage and putting them through harsh measures. But is that really the case? Well, here are the unvanished facts. Someone who had visited Disneyland a day before tested positive for COVID-19. So, to ensure the visitors were safe, Shanghai Disney Resort announced on October 31st that they were temporarily suspending entry, and some attractions inside the park will also temporarily stop operating. Now, the guests still inside the park were asked to do a swab test. Nobody was trapped or locked down, nor were they subjected to any measure harsher than having to stand in a line and open their mouth wide for a few seconds. Even the report contradicts itself, adding that while such measures would likely be seen as draconian in the West, the reaction was relatively mild by national Chinese standards. Relatively mild, so no one panicked or threw a hissy fit. Instead, they all took the test in an orderly fashion, since they know an extraordinary pandemic needs extraordinary measures. The government is trying to keep them safe. And once the results indicated there were no infections among Sunday's visitors, Shanghai Disneyland returned to business as usual less than 72 hours later. Which must have been disappointing the New York Times reporter who had written the amusement park will be closed at least through November 2nd, with no guarantee of reopening after that. While the incident triggered comments on social media on both Chinese and non-Chinese platforms, many lauded the action, calling it efficient and responsible. China cherishes people's life. This comment on Twitter summed up this school of thought, which was ignored in these reports. But why does a section of the media always portray everything that China does as authoritarian and terrible? Well, government's COVID-19 control measures have halted the death toll, kept new infections controlled, and maintained economic growth in the face of a global slowdown. Could this have been possible without some heavy-handed measures? And at the same time, the government has also implemented care measures such as free treatment for COVID-19 patients. And China's top epidemiologist Zhou Nanshan said by the end of this year, about 80% of the population in China should have been vaccinated with 2 shots. While people in some Western countries are angry with their governments for not doing enough, ironically, their media have been projecting China's measures as repressive and trying to find problems. And when they don't find problems, some manufacture them. Check out this CNN report. China grows more isolated as Asia-Pacific neighbors start living with COVID-19. Well, where is the isolation? Yes, there is some control over international travel, but China is in the thick of international events. Recently, it hosted the UN Biodiversity Conference in October. The China International Import Expo just ended in Shanghai on November 10th. And in February, we have Beijing 2022, the Winter Olympics. On the other hand, in Europe, there are new cases and fears of a new wave of the pandemic in Germany, Austria, Russia, Ukraine, and elsewhere. This has prompted thoughts of new lockdowns. Yes, you heard that right, lockdowns. But the World Health Organization's regional director for Europe said the current pace of transmission across the 53 countries of the European region is of grave concern. He also warned that there could be 500,000 COVID-related deaths in the region if measures are not taken. So do you understand now why China is following a zero COVID-19 policy, especially with Beijing 2022 less than 3 months away and the Winter Paralympics coming up in March? Well, these events involve tens of thousands of people and industries and immense investment. China has a responsibility to all of them. And it's better to take precautions and be safe than sorry, right? Is this so hard to understand? And besides human rights concerns, they are projecting the zero COVID-19 strategy as hitting the economy, like this CNBC report. China's zero COVID strategy will cause its economy to slow down further, economists warned. It starts with the prediction that China's economic slowdown will worsen as the Asian giant forges on with its zero COVID strategy. But when you read on, you will find it's an individual opinion. And the economist quoted says domestic demand in China will be under pressure. But the Chinese economy is not just domestic demand. It has other key components like exports, manufacturing, and services, which are all doing fine, as the International Monetary Fund has just projected China to see an 8% growth this year. So, since there is so much concern about China's zero COVID-19 policy, let's have an expert explain it. My colleague Liu Xin spoke to Dr. Zhou Nanshan, one of the top scientists in China and an eminent doctor. Dr. Zhou was on the forefront of the battle against SARS between 2002 and 2004 and against COVID-19 last year. She asked him if the zero-tolerance policy was not too costly and unsustainable. This is what he said. Take a listen.
The zero tolerance or zero transmission strategy is a last resort because the virus spreads too quickly and its reproduction rate is too high. It seems that despite the vaccines, the death rate is still about 2% worldwide, a level still too high to be tolerated. It's true that the current cost of adopting a zero transmission policy is indeed high. But it would cost even more if we live with it and open up. China will stick to the zero infection policy for a rather long time. As for how long it will last, it really depends on how other countries perform in controlling the virus. Even if China is doing a good job, as long as it opens to the rest of the world, there will certainly be imported cases. So I think the current zero transmission strategy is not too costly. Instead, it's a relatively low-cost approach under the current circumstances.
So there you have it. Dr. Zhou also said the mortality rate for seasonal influenza is 0.5%, but for COVID-19, it is now 2% globally. Also, the nature of the virus is still not fully known, and it's still mutating with severe impact. Didn't the media itself call it a deadly contagion? Well, you can't cause something deadly and yet want to coexist with it. China's goal is to continue vaccination and research and bring down the mortality rate to the same level as influenza. Only then maybe we can live with it. Meantime, life is not all locked down, plummeting economy and doom and despair. This ABC report, why Chinese citizens support COVID-0, even if it means being cutting off from family, gets the real picture. It finds people supports the restrictions and live normally as long as they don't travel. Perhaps one reason for getting it right is that the reporters cared enough for the truth to speak to real people and not make up their own stories. And on that note, it's time for a short break. When we come back together with our guests, I'll discuss a possible date when China might open up and international travels resume. So do stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Headline Buster. Now about China's zero COVID policy. We have so much to talk about. Let me first introduce to you my awesome panel. Today we're joined by Zoon Ahmed Khan, a research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. She's joining us live from Beijing. Also, Professor Josef Mahoney at East China Normal University is joining us from Memphis, the States. Thank you for joining us, Professor. And last but not least, Professor Zhiwei, Center for Public Health Research Medical School at Nanjing University. Professor Wu is joining us live in Nanjing. Welcome to you all. So let's talk about this. Let me start with you, Professor Mahoney. Let me get your reaction first to the Shanghai Disney incident, right? How do you think they handled the situation? Was it necessary or was it excessive?
I don't think it was excessive. As you described, it was responsibility. It was responding to a danger. In fact, I know people who were in Shanghai and they got contact tracing later that day, the next day, people who worked in offices. And so it was something that moved along very quickly, was resolved very quickly, and people had confidence that the situation was handled and that it would be taken care of. I know people who were put out by the inconvenience, but no one was really opposed to the policy.
And Professor Wu, I mean, you are an expert on public health policies, right? How are you looking at this? Describe to us what would happen if things were not done this way. You know, actions were not taken immediately, still letting people in, letting tens of thousands of people go home without knowing whether they were infected or not. What could be the risks?
Well, actually, in the Disney case, it's quite necessary to do it because think about more than 30,000 people gather in the park. It's very hard to trace individually. So I think in this case, when you lock down and do a very prompt testing, let people go. I think this is something actually you have to do. If you just let people out of the park, the complication is that those people are coming from various different provinces that they will carry the virus to different parts of the country, then that would be a tremendous problem in the public health sense. I think that in this particular testing in the Disney park, it was very quick, very fast, and also the park even providing certain entertainment as well, such as fireworks. So I really I think that's the right way to do it.
Yeah, they still had the fireworks, and it was a very fast operation. They managed to test all the 34,000 people within 3 hours. Then the test result came out in the next morning, right? If you put it elsewhere, it might take up to days, and they may not have enough test kits for that, right? In such short notice. And Zoom, let me bring you into this. You live in China. How are you looking at all this? Why do you find the Shanghai government feel it's necessary to do this way?
So I think I personally agree entirely with both the other panelists. It's true that this zero COVID, zero case policy makes us people living in China more confident about where we are going. We feel safe. Contact tracing is possible because the virus has not been allowed to fester. And the inconvenience of it is actually not that much when we especially think of the alternative, which could be appalling. We've seen cases of countries where COVID spread, and when you think about a population as big as this, spreading could mean much worse, especially in terms of human lives. So I have a little bit of an example as well. I was Universal Beijing also reported a case, and I had a shoot over there the next day. We checked with the authorities, and because they were able to resolve the issue so quickly, even now I feel like the speed at which China can do things is broadly underestimated. But within a day, they were able to manage the situation, and we, after confirming, went and everything was okay. We feel safe because of the speed and effectiveness with which measures are being taken. And there's overall, like I would feel safe to go to Shanghai Disney right now. I would feel safe to travel anywhere, which after checking, of course, where cases have been reported, making sure that we're not going in a medium or high risk area. And that's why a lot of travel and overall confidence is possible.
Well, how do you guys feel about the media coverage in some Western outlets? Professor Mahoney, we are hearing a lot of words like harsh measures, draconian. Is that fair? I mean, I don't hear those words when we are reporting on lockdowns in, for example, Italy, other European countries, New Zealand, and Australia.
Well, the fact of the matter is we have this polarization, and you find it in the United States. You find it in Germany. I was reading the politics of Germany today. I have a friend there who's advising the government. And, we see some of the same sentiments of anti-vax and distrust in government officials and government leaders and the pharmaceutical industry or the medical industry. So all of this distrust is percolating in ways where any sort of control becomes sort of an intolerable taking. And, you know, you take this on top of all the negativity that has been pushed towards China, especially during the Trump years, but also towards some by some anti-China people in Europe, in Germany, and other places, who have tried to blame China for this outbreak, who've tried to make China somehow responsible for it. And so I think there's this resentment and this desire to find fault, to blame, and to, you know, even in cases where there's a success story, in the case of China's containment and control, return from negative to positive growth, its high FDI, all these things, there's a desire to distrust and to look down on and to blame and to try to make it all a negative story.
Zoon, what do you think? How accurately do you think these reports are describing the situation here on the ground?
Unfortunately, we are living in a time when there is an entire industry dedicated to sensationalizing issues. And when we talk about media, especially Western media, the problem is that their target is to find flaws and blame China, even when, as Professor Mahoney said, we are looking at a very successful strategy. We are living in a different reality. Of course, every country is paying a different price, but the price that's being paid here does not include the lives of people. People's lives, safety is what is being prioritized. And unfortunately, we're also living in a time when there are attempts to discredit, delegitimize, and make China seem as draconian, and that's what's leading to these kind of accusations, exaggerating the ground pulse. Like you mentioned in the news report, people are panicking, but here we see that people are appreciating the policy. Of course, all of us want things to go back to pre-COVID era. We all want to be able to travel. But now, given the reality that we find ourselves in, we are adapting to it. So I think there is an effort to make China look like they are failing or they are too harsh. But when you look at ground numbers, you look at the number of lives globally that have been lost, and look at China's example, it is clearly a success story. So we need to make sure that at least within China, I think the voices, people experiencing it, we can express it, we can talk about it. I've taken more tests than I can count on both hands, and it's perfectly okay because I feel safe because everyone is following this policy, and that safety is the most important thing.
And this strategy that China is pursuing, or this zero COVID strategy, it has received so many criticisms around the world. But when New Zealand has been pursuing a similar zero COVID policy, we didn't see much criticisms there. But Professor Wu, let's talk about this strategy, right? We have heard Dr. Zhou Nanshan saying that the mortality rate now for COVID-19 is still at 2% worldwide until this is brought down to the level of influenza, which is 0.5%. It's even more costlier for China to open up and live with the virus. How are you looking at this strategy? How long do you think this strategy will last?
Well, we have to look at it when we first created this so-called zero COVID tolerance policy. When the time we did not have vaccines, and also it was based on the assumptions that once you bring down the infection into zero for a certain period, the pandemic would stop. But in the past year, what we realized is that this virus is so contagious that even when you bring down the infection into zero, it won't stop. It just comes back so quickly that, and that's spreading to other parts of the country as well. The other thing is that for the 2% fatality rate, I think this is very much based on the 5 million deaths in 250 million infection. As we have the vaccines, what we realize that the vaccines could bring down the fatality rates and the severe cases as well. So I would say that once we have the vaccination rates reach 80 or even higher percentage, then the death rate would bring down. We have to I think right now we don't really have solid clinical data coming out yet. But I would believe that in those vaccinated people, the fatality rates were way below 2%.
Professor Wu, do you think the policymakers in China have a deadline in mind, or there's no definitive answer as to when they can bring the mortality rate down to the level of influenza?
Well, I wouldn't think that they would have a certain deadline in mind to open up. But I think this is something up to discussion right now. We have to realize that pretty much we're at a turning point right now, that when we have the vaccination rates about 80%, that's pretty much we initially expect to do it. And when the fatality rates in the vaccinated population is below the influenza death rates, then once you have also therapeutic drugs, then this is a time we need to think about whether we could devise a new intervention approach and opening up society to a certain extent to bring back the economy and bring back people's life into a normal state.
Professor Mahoney, let me get your take on China's strategy. I know every policy, every strategy has advantages and disadvantages, but how do you weigh the pros and cons of China's zero COVID strategy?
Well, I agree with the professor. I do think that we will see some moderation of the policy. I'm optimistic. I think we'll see it, especially as the new treatments are coming online. We've already seen the Merck treatment approved in the UK. There are others in the pipeline. I'm sure China has them as well. So maybe by next summer if we're lucky. But I think that in overall the policies have been very reasonable. But most importantly, I think the thing that we have to keep in mind is that they're overwhelmingly supported by the Chinese people. In other words, this is a government that is delivering on what its people want, as opposed to what we see in the West, where people are very unhappy with their government. They were very unhappy with Trump, and now Biden is at 38% approval rating. And Germany itself is a mess. The UK is a mess. So, how do we assess success and even democracy in these terms?
And Professor Wu, I also want to talk about booster shots, right? Now it's been reported that in China, over 1 billion people have received 2 shots of the vaccine, but we're now talking about a third round of shots, a third shot, a booster shot. Is this booster shot necessary for all age groups, all population groups, or just for certain high-risk groups?
Well, from the clinical data feedback, we realize that for all the vaccines, whether it's a nucleic acid vaccine or the inactive virus vaccine, after a certain month, 6 months, the blood neutralizing antibody or antibody titers actually go down significantly. So that would affect its protection efficacy. So that's why we need to take a third booster shots. So that's exactly what we are doing, not only in China, but also in other countries as well, that the booster shot would increase the blood antibody levels. That would certainly provide better protection. So I think this is definitely necessary in case when we look back, when we started vaccination in this country more than 6 months ago. I think overall, as far as we understood, or based on the limited data from clinical, that this booster shot would be needed for all the age groups. But we are now prioritizing this booster shot to certain groups who are at a higher risk of contracting infections, such as customer workers, airport and transportation, and medical workers as well. So I think it has to be a gradual process.
So let's now talk about when can we make travel plans, right? We just heard Dr. Zhou Nanshan, China's top epidemiologist, predicting that by the end of 2022, regulations, by the vaccination rate, regulations on international travels to some countries with a high vaccination rate may ease. Zoon, when do you think we can make international travel plans?
I honestly, thinking about what's been going on since COVID started, we wouldn't have expected we would still be here. So I think let's just see. I'm not making any plans, obviously, and I hope that more important is for families that are not united right now, for them to be able to, unite at some point. I think that should also be a priority. Many students will need to complete their degrees. You know, these kind of things are important. I hope, yes, mid-2022 or towards the end, let's also see, like Professor Mahoney said, how the treatments improve, how the global situation evolves. And it will depend on many factors. But I do feel like it will happen gradually. And maybe there will be priorities first, like people who need to come back, they should be prioritized, and then depends on also the countries, how they are dealing with COVID. So far, we've seen a lot of chaos globally, indefinite lockdowns, multiple waves. So in this situation, it's obviously hard to predict when and how China can further open to international travel. So no plans so far, but I'm hopeful and I'm confident that at least here we'll make sure people are safe and do as much as possible to guarantee that the policy can serve the broader interests of people.
Professor Mahoney, what about you? Because I know that this has affected your life too, right? Are you planning to come back to China anytime soon? And how are you looking at the risks that China might take in the future when opening up, you know, the risk of cross-border infections?
Well, yeah, as I said earlier, I am optimistic that we will see, you know, a confluence of factors that may produce some easing by next summer for some groups. Yeah, you know, I think that in my case, you know, it's been very disappointing that I haven't been able to get back to my life, my work, my friends in Shanghai. Fortunately, I can still fulfill my responsibilities online and via satellite. You know, I don't worry about the future. I focus on the present, take care of my own, and hope everyone else does the same.
Focus on the present. That's what we all should do. Thank you very much. That's all the time we have for today. Appreciate your insights. Zoon Ahmed Khan joining us in Beijing, Professor Josef Mahoney joining us from Memphis, and Professor Zhiwei joining us live from Nanjing. Thank you all. And that's going to do it for this edition of Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. We thank you for your company. We'll see you same time next week. Bye for now.